Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we gotta talk about this David Pakman video where David makes the case that crime actually down, not up, nothing to worry about. Republicans and Fox News, they're just lying about you, and unfortunately for David Pakman, this is the same exact trick I am often confronted with, where you pick a random moment in time, you then say crime declined from there, but you ignore the preceding increase and the fact that we have a higher baseline. So we're going to talk about it. I'm going to refute it, dispute it, debunk it, destroy it. You know the whole deal. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. So the headline of this video is crime, all caps, keeps declining. Fox keeps lying about it. Now, what's amazing about this particular video is that he's going to play a Fox News clip. Now, I am not very trusting of Fox News. I don't like the way most media outlets report on this particular issue. But when we get to the point where he actually plays the clip, you're going to realize that David Pakman is losing an argument to a static video that he should be able to respond to. But before we get all the way over there, we got to start at the beginning, so let's roll the clip.
You know, crime continues to decline, and yet Fox News and other right-wing media continue to lie about it. We actually have new criminal crime data, which is very much telling a different story than what you might be hearing on TV.
So first of all, I want to give David Pakman credit. I didn't have to go hunt this down myself. He actually cited this, linked this in the description of his video. So what we're going to do is go to this. And of course, what we're going to find out is that he is pitching us the least reliable crime data, the most new crime data that isn't even fully filled out. And that, of course, is the crime data from 2023, the year that we're currently in, up to Q3, compared to that same point in time last year in 2022. Now, we're going to get into why this is ridiculous and absurd in just a moment, but I just want you guys to understand when you're looking at this, that this data set, even for this period of time, is incomplete in comparison to last year. First and foremost, what you'll find out immediately on comparison to the 2022 data is that the 2022 data features 15,726 law enforcement agencies reporting. That's nearly 16,000. However, this incomplete 2023 data presented to us by David Pakman only has data from 14,005 law enforcement agencies. This is because many of these agencies operate on a different timetable when they churn their data over to the feds. So some of them will churn it over at year's end, and there's no acknowledgement from Pakman that you're shy nearly 2,000 law enforcement agencies in this data set. On top of that, this is all crime reporting data.
This is from the FBI Crime Data Explorer, new data from 2022 to 2023.
And as we talked about on this channel multiple different times, the most reliable crime data does not actually come from the Uniform Crime Report. It comes from the National Crime Victimization Survey, which is a survey that is sent out to about 150,000 households each and every year. It has almost 200,000 participants depending on the year, and these people talk about their status of victimization. Now, this survey is absolutely great because a lot of crime does not get reported to law enforcement. It is considered the gold standard of crime data. Now, that is not to say that reporting has no value. In fact, the other most accurate crime statistics that you're ever going to get are the homicide statistics. And the reason why you get that from the reporting data is because with homicide, you have a body. Either this person was killed or they weren't killed by another person. So it's pretty easy to tell that that is a homicide. And obviously, you're not going to get good homicide data from surveys because the victims of homicide are really bad at checking the boxes on a survey for obvious reasons. But without further ado, let's go into what David Pakman is trying to sell to us.
In terms of violent crime, what you see here is that violent crime is down in cities of every size. In the largest cities of 1 million people or more, violent crime is down 15% over the last year. That is a remarkable number. If you look at smaller cities, crime is down between 7% or 10%, 8%. Even in non-metropolitan counties, crime is down. If you look regionally, you see that crime is down in the Northeast by 11%. Violent crime is down in the Midwest by 11%. It's down in the South and the West by 7%. respectively. And this is not the story. This is not the story that you are getting just about anywhere.
So right here, David, of course, is rattling off the numbers, trying to get through them as quick as possible, but I just want you guys to remember that he is comparing the current least reliable 2023 numbers, which, by the way, have some good indicators in it, and I'm rooting for crime to go down, to the 2022 numbers. And the question that I always ask people when they say crime is down compared to what? Because if you have a giant crime increase, let's say hypothetically, theoretically, metaphorically, I don't know, after the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020, let's say you had something like a 30% increase in homicide, the greatest increase year over year in the history of the country, followed by a 7% increase in homicide the following year, and then you report to me that homicide is actually down from that new baseline 5%. Is crime really down, or is homicide actually elevated compared to those 2019 numbers? This is the same exact trick, just with some new charts that we're often confronted with, and also is incredibly unreliable, which I will explain to you a little bit later.
Okay, David, well, that's violent crime. What about property crime? Property crime is also down in cities of all sizes. It's especially down in non-metropolitan counties, but if you look at the largest cities, it is down. What's interesting is I guess it's flat. In the largest cities, largest cities, it's flat, property crime. And then in cities 500,000 to 1 million, it's down. 250,000 to 500,000, it's down. 100K to 250K, it's down. Property crime is down.
So right here, David pivots to property crimes, and he says they're the most down in rural counties, which is not that surprising to people out there in the audience. And then he stops for a second and says, well, I guess it's flat in major metropolitan areas over 1 million people. Now, we don't have that many cities over 1 million people, and what I'd like to do right now is focus on just one, and that, of course, is New York City, because let's say New York City has their property crimes down or flat compared to the previous year. Does that mean that it's no big deal and it's not significant and there aren't significant problems with property crime? Well, we've pulled up this chart before. I'm going to put it out there for you again. This is a chart of theft of all different categories of New York City from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And what you can see right here is that theft, specifically retail theft, is up 77% in New York City. So if we had a 77% jump in theft over a 2-year period, and then it flatlined around there,
it is down. What's interesting is I guess it's flat. In the largest cities, largest cities, it's flat, property crime. What's interesting is I guess it's flat. In the largest cities, largest cities, it's flat, property crime.
Then you can understand, just because it's not going up, then obviously it is still extremely elevated. So it being flat after dramatic increases in retail theft, again, is not crime being down overall, but it does accentuate the problems in David Pakman's analysis. All of these numbers mean nothing outside of the broader context of the last few years. Let's say we had 100 instances of theft to keep the numbers as simple as possible. Then you had 100% increase, a doubling in thefts, 200 particular instances. Then it declines the next year 5%, so you hack off 10 instances and you're at 190. Now, I would say that category of crime, theft is what we're talking about, being at 190 compared to the normal pattern that we saw for years and years and years of around 100 means that it's up. But David Pakman would say, no, it's down 5% because I just started counting yesterday.
Violent crime is down. Okay, well, David, what about specifically if we look at murder? Murder is down as well. Murder is down 25% in the largest cities, and 9% in the next size cities, and down 22% in the smaller cities, and down 15% in cities that are even smaller. All types of crime are down everywhere.
Now, I referenced this earlier, and he's talking about the cities. Let me give you the nationwide numbers, and then, again, we'll talk about specific cities in terms of homicide. So the first thing that he says is murder is down. Murder is down 25% in the largest cities in the country. These are cities over 1 million people. We'll get into that in a minute. Now, again, this begs the question, down compared to what? Because during the Black Lives Matter riots, we saw a 30% increase in homicide year over year, the greatest of all time. The only other year that even comes close is 2001, and this is boosted up by the fact that 3,000 people were killed on September 11th in one single day, so that is a complete outlier year. Nowhere on this chart does anything come close to touching that. Then we saw a 7% increase in homicide. Then we saw a drop in homicide nationwide. So that drop is from this new elevated baseline. Now let's take it to some of the big cities. You have New York City, again, largest city in the country. New York City was ahead of the curve of the nation's 30% increase in homicide. They saw a 47% increase in homicide. So going down 25% from that new elevated baseline still means that they're significantly elevated. Los Angeles saw a similar increase, around 40% in homicides. We've talked about it on this channel before, and going down again in comparison to that 40% increase in homicides, that new baseline, also not very good.
Murder is down as well. Murder is down 25% in the largest cities, and 9% in the next size cities, and down 22% in the smaller cities.
Now, to be 100% clear, these homicide numbers are the most reliable numbers because, again, like I told you before, you're really counting bodies and assessing cause of death. So I am of the belief that at least to this point in time, compared to 2022, this is a real decrease in the number of homicides in the United States of America, and that is genuinely a good thing. But what David Pakman wants to deny, what he wants to ignore, is that this comes after a significant increase in homicides. Now, I would like to pivot a little bit backwards in this video to talk about the other data that was put forward by David Pakman.
In terms of violent crime, what you see here is that violent crime is down in cities of every size.
So in my previous video, you might remember it was about how to manipulate crime statistics and how people on the left, and I didn't include Pakman in there, but guess what? He made the list, do so with the least reliable data. I broke down the differences between the UCR and the National Crime Victimization Survey. Now, this is 2022 numbers. However, unfortunately, the reporting crisis in the United States seems to have exacerbated, not actually narrowed. And what we found, according to the Uniform Crime Report, according to the 2022 numbers versus the already elevated 2021 numbers, was that overall crime was down 2%, which is good. 2% isn't nothing. I mean, you might say it's statistically insignificant. It was after a dramatic increase, but anytime we get positive data, I think that's A-OK, first class all the way. But the thing is, we often compare the Uniform Crime Report data to the National Crime Victimization Survey so that we can figure out whether or not crime is actually dropping or reporting is just dropping while crime may be going up. And in this particular year, we saw the exact reason why we have both of these reports because, again, the stark differences could show us problems in reporting, not actually good data when it comes to criminal justice related policy. And look at what we found when we compared the two. And remember, usually these are pretty well aligned in terms of the percentage increase or percentage decrease. However, in 2022, we saw this. So while we saw a decline in total violent crime of 2%, the National Crime Victimization Survey actually showed us an increase in crime, violent crime, of 75%. While we saw a decline in rape of 6%, we actually saw an increase in survey participation from the victims of rape of 58%, while robbery was only elevated by 1%, again, not that statistically significant. We actually saw reports of victimization by robbers up 47%, and for aggravated assault, we saw it down 2% as compared to a 104% increase in aggravated assault. And I'm going to link this whole article in the description of this video, which will explain how they rarely diverge this much, and that divergence could be down to the fact that we saw a great decrease in reporting. 52% in 2021 were the number of violent crimes that were reported to the police. That got down to 48%, which is actually an 8% or there's about drop in reporting of violent crime to the police. And as you can see, where the disparities get wider, the reporting of that violent crime, according to the victimization survey, also got wider. Let me break that down for you again. So in 2021, 61% of aggravated assaults were reported to the police, and that was actually down to 50% in 2022, which is a decrease in reporting of 18% relatively. And by the way, when you actually actually look into the explanations for why specifically reporting has gone down, they cite a number of things. First and foremost, they cite the fact that police officers are short-staffed and response times have increased. The left defunded the police. A bunch of officers went into early retirement just because they decided to restore funding to the police later in many of these places. That did not rematerialize these officers, and due to those delays, specifically for assaults, there were less assaults recorded by the police. So essentially, a leftist policy led to a crime increase. It led to diminishing reporting capability from the police, and David Pakman is citing that error, that mistake from the left, in order to convince you that crime is not going down. On top of that, they have declining trust in or increasing fear of the police, which may have played a role as well. Again, the left ran a propaganda campaign against the police. It causes all these problems in society, so people are more likely to not report crimes to the police than they were in previous years. And by the way, if you're thinking it's down to evil white racism and black people being more scared than whites, apparently black victims are no less likely to report criminal victimizations to the police than white victims as of this data in 2022. So to be clear, so far what Pakman is presenting to you out there in the audience is the reporting data. He's comparing the very unreliable, in fact, the uniquely unreliable 2022 data to the 2023 incomplete data in order to paint a picture for you that violent crime is down overall. He is also not acknowledging that even if crime were to decline slightly in 2023 from 2022, that since the Black Lives Matter riots, when you compare the 2020 numbers to the 2019 numbers, crime is significantly elevated in a bunch of different categories. And one of the ones that he ignores plainly to your face is the homicide increase. Again, the question that I always want you to ask whenever somebody says crime is down compared to what? When did you start counting? Why did you start counting at that particular point? And by the way, I'm not even necessarily accusing David Pakman of doing so wittingly. What I've learned when I discuss criminal justice related topics with a lot of people from across the spectrum, but especially true on the left wing, is that they don't understand the data that they're talking about. What you can find under the source where he actually links the original in the description of this video is an article. And of course, that article has a perspective. It's from an outlet called Midas Touch News. And if you likely never heard of it, it might be easy to assume that this is a news outlet with a liberal perspective. But the thing is, it's actually worse than that. This is a progressive super PAC that pushes for left-wing policy like criminal justice reform. So David Pakman is citing data cherry-picked for him by a so-called news agency that in reality is a super PAC that has a vested interest in pushing the very policies that this cherry-picked data is actually highlighting and advocating for. So what ended up happening, in my opinion, is that David was fed this perspective and he's just regurgitating it out to his audience. But it gets really dubious, and he really shows his lack of knowledge when he plays the Jesse Waters clip, because what Jesse Waters says, even though it's a static video that David Pakman could listen to 100 times before he addresses it, is actually completely different from what David Pakman is saying and what he's characterizing him as saying.
And yet, when you watch Fox News, you see stuff like this.
T-shirts.
Dedicated.
I look if what kind of alcohol is sitting next to them. I look everywhere, and if I see one thing that makes me suspicious, red flag.
We don't go to their house. Remember that time you broke into that house?
Do you remember?
Yes.
And then we moved stuff around to make it look like we weren't in there.
Yeah.
And you know, you're cherry picking again, Jessica.
No.
If you look at the NYPD statistics for here in Manhattan from 2019 to 2023. Every single element of crime is up. Every single one.
No.
If you compare it to 19, it was just in the New York Post. What, are you going to call your other colleague a liar again? Now,
so right there, if you guys are paying attention, Jesse Waters is talking about the 2019 numbers. In fact, he specifically said the NYPD data from 2019 to 2023, crime is particularly elevated. Now, David Pakman is trying to paint him as an idiot, trying to paint him as going with his gut feeling rather than the data, rather than the facts. And he's going to say that a little bit later after he makes this joke about Waters and his wedding ring, which, by the way, would be funnier if Jesse Waters didn't make that exact same joke himself on the Five.
You also have to trust your gut. When I go out now, I take my wedding band off. I put it in my pocket because I don't want to get jacked. And I'm very athletic.
Think that they're going to...
I wonder if there's some other reason Jesse's taking his wedding band off when he goes out.
Tell your wife when you forget to put it back on.
Stop it. Of all the things I said on the show, that's going to get me in trouble.
Listen, they just talk about crime is up and inflation's up. And what this really reminds us is the numbers don't matter to them.
No, David, the numbers don't matter to you. Watersett specifically, now he said Manhattan, but in reality, when you're referencing the NYPD data, even though you can break it down to the borough, it's true of New York City. Crime is up all over the city since 2019. The numbers don't matter to you, David, because you're trying to push a narrative. And a perfect example of this is where you're going with inflation and how deceiving you're being to the audience.
Inflation is down. Inflation is down dramatically and significantly. And yet they continue to say, things are more expensive than ever.
Right there, David says inflation is down dramatically, yet they seem to say that all these things are more expensive than they were before. Now, the trick that David Pakman is using with inflation is actually dumber than the trick that he's using when it comes to crime data, because at least he's showing you some data from some specific areas where crime is actually declining. But what David Pakman is talking about right here is the inflation rate, and what the left often does with this is the same trick that David's trying to put forward. So let's say the inflation rate, just for argument's sake, is 10%. So something that used to be able to cost you $1 to buy now costs you $1.10. And that's the inflation rate for a particular year. Now, the next year, the inflation rate is actually 5%. Now, according to David Pakman, inflation has been cut in half, and you should stop complaining about things being more expensive. However, according to reality, that 5% compounds on top of the previous year's 10%, meaning things are more expensive. And that 5% comes out of the new $1.10. So what that would mean on the calculator is that thing that cost you $1 originally 2 years ago, $1.10 a year ago, now costs you $1.15.5 today. So yes, inflation would still be going up, yet David Pakman saying it's going down because the rate of inflation is slowing, not because it's going down. So he's wrong right there as well, but for a different, actually more stupid reason. But again, he's a leftist, so economic illiteracy kind of goes hand in hand with the territory.
Crime is down, all types of crime, in all sized cities, in all regions of the country. And they insist that there is a Biden-fueled crime wave of rampant destruction and property crime and murder and sexual assault and everything. It's not actually happening. Much like with the economy, if people don't know that, we kind of lose the benefit of the fact that things are improving. But they are going to continue pushing this narrative because their audience doesn't know any better.
Yeah, David, the thing is, it is actually happening. You just started counting from an arbitrary point that you think helps make your argument. Again, let's say there were 100 murders a day in the United States of America. Every single day, 100 murders. Then one day, yesterday, there were 200 murders. 100% increase in homicides. And then from every point on, we ended up with 150 murders a day. David Pakman would say, you know what? Murder's down 25% from that 200 mark, that high water mark, because I just started counting randomly at that 200 mark. I would say murder's actually up significantly. It's actually up 50% from the 100 mark, and that is something that we should pay attention to. But David would argue till he's blue in the face. He would go into full denial mode, because again, the trick always is with these lefties is down compared to what? And although they will tell you in a bunch of other categories that surveys are more useful, that you should rely on surveys, specifically when they're uniquely unreliable surveys, I tend to find out, even though we have the gold standard of crime surveys, the National Crime Victimization Survey, they decide to use the least reliable, unfinalized reporting data sets because they want to roll with that, because right now, in this very moment, that actually serves their narrative.
But they are going to continue pushing this narrative because their audience doesn't know any better.
So yeah, David, crime is up. You're in denial of it. You went out of your way to dig up a video of Jesse Waters so that you could debunk him, and you didn't actually address his claim, which was specific to New York City, which specifically referenced the rates this year compared to 2019, pre the Black Lives Matter riots, because if you did that, if you actually acknowledged the data, if you actually broadened it out more than a couple of days in terms of your analysis, you would be proven wrong. Your economic position, also completely illiterate, but we don't got the time to address that right now in this moment, even though I did a pretty decent job of explaining that one. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about David Pakman being dead wrong on crime. Till next time.